Hello, welcome to this July 2017 Get Started with CyVerse webinar. I'm Jason Williams, coming to you from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. Welcome. This is a one-hour webinar that we put together each month, mainly targeted at new CyVerse users. And so in the course of this 1 hour, we'll get a chance to demonstrate some of the capabilities of CyVerse, give you a look at how to get started with some common routines, such as uploading your data, analyzing your data, using the cloud, and tell you just a little bit about the project. Before we get started, I'd like to familiarize you with these Adobe Connect technology that we're using. So first of all, at the bottom of your screen, you should see that you have the ability to ask questions. One of the reasons why we do this live every month is so that you can ask questions. We can't always anticipate what you might need from us, so we encourage you to go ahead and ask questions. Also on the side of the screen there, what you should see is that there's some downloads. So there's a couple of brochures, but also pay attention to the links. The links give you some tutorials and guides. I'll be using or referring to those through the webinar, so you'll have a chance to follow along if you're so inclined. But most of the times people might want to save those and come back to them later. Also, during the course of the webinar, at the top of the screen, there are some arrows, and you have the ability to make this full screen. So there's a little box with 4 arrows in it. You can make the presentation full screen, and that is especially helpful when I go to show you things that are going to be on my computer only. Finally, if you'd like to adjust the resolution at which the video is coming to you, if you just move your mouse anywhere over the video portion, you'll get a box in the upper left-hand side where you can adjust the quality of the streaming. So if your connection is not that great, you may want to reduce it from HD. Okay, so what I intend to do is just give you a very high-level overview briefly of CyVerse as a project. Then we're going to cover 3 demos on data upload analysis in the CyVerse discovery environment, as well as using the Atmosphere Cloud. So let's get started. So CyVerse as a project has certainly a vision, and that vision is transforming science through data-driven discovery. As we know, most of us are working with large data sets, and so having the tools that you need to analyze those large data sets is what's going to move you towards discovery. We have more than 40,000 users. We have petabytes of data, hundreds of publications and courses, and in fact discoveries that are enabled by these technologies. CyVerse as a project actually started under a different name called iPlant Collaborative, which was funded in 2008. The first tools that we produced as a project came out in 2010, followed by a successful renewal of the project in 2013 as we broadened our scope really to become cyber infrastructure for life sciences. The project has continued successfully since then, with the official name CyVerse a little bit more than a year ago, and the new byline of transforming science through data-driven discovery. One thing that's really important to emphasize, and that we are very proud of, is that we're a project that's funded by the National Science Foundation. So we're not a company, we're not selling anything, we're your colleagues and your collaborators. And this is essentially a $100 million investment that's been made freely to the community. So for researchers thinking about whether they'd like to leverage CyVerse or not, the message that we often want to portray to them is that there are all of these resources that have been invested in, and you as a researcher, as an investigator, can come and make use of these resources however you see fit without any direct cost. So we hope that you find a lot of it useful and that you take the parts you need and that you leave the rest. We also are encouraged and continue to encourage international users, because collaboration is certainly part of our science, and so everyone has free access to CyVerse. We do like it, of course, if when you make use of our resources, you don't forget to cite and acknowledge us. So very quickly, what is cyber infrastructure? Cyber infrastructure isn't anything you don't already use to some degree. Data storage, software, maybe high-performance computing, and people. But the idea of cyber infrastructure is to organize these disparate resources into systems that allow you to solve problems of size and scope, problems that you might not otherwise be able to solve if they weren't made available to you in this way. So CyVerse delivers this community-focused cyber infrastructure, which are essentially, you can think of it along these 3 domains of the platform's tools and data sets, the actual physical storage and compute, as well as training and support. The other thing that's important for our users to know is that CyVerse is built for data. So whether you're working with microbes, plants, animals, biomedical data, ecological data, sequence image, other data types, really any type of data, there are tools and services within CyVerse that you can make use of. This is a high-level view of what we'd call the CyVerse product stack. Starting at the top are some of the things we'll cover and address in the demo. These are the tools and platforms that you just open up a web browser and in most cases just navigate to and go ahead and start using with your data. Beneath it, however, are whole layers of different foundational services and resources. These things are actually accessible to you in greater or lesser degree, especially through the API. The power user, somebody who's a bioinformatician or a developer, can actually customize how they consume CyVerse. Most of us who are operating as bench biologists will be at this product layer where we're able to just use a platform as is. The community has continued to shape what priorities we deliver, and so just one example, although not the only example, from genomics. These are the types of tools that you'd expect to find within CyVerse for everything from reference-guided assembly, RNA-seq, variant calling. There's plenty of things there, really the whole layer that you'd like to use for genomics, but it's more than genomics because there are tools for phenotypes, tools for other types of investigation as well. Finally, CyVerse as an institution is made up of several institutions, primarily University of Arizona, where the project PI is based, but also large contributions of staff, personnel, and resources from Texas Advanced Computing Center and UT Austin, as well as Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory and UNC Wilmington. We also remember our partner organization, and they're increasingly members even internationally that are federated with CyVerse, including CyVerse UK, a separately funded project through BBSRC. So let me now take a moment to move and transition into the actual products. So these are the things that come with your CyVerse account. As we saw from the opening poll, and this tends to be the case, most of our users find out about us via word of mouth. And so we'd like to make sure that everybody, whether they're a little bit familiar with CyVerse already or whether this is their first time really having any kind of training, understand what it is that CyVerse delivers. And one metaphor that we sometimes use is that of Lego blocks. So CyVerse has built many of the individual pieces that you need, and you can take those pieces and build out the endpoints that are important to your research. So what are some of those pieces? Well, the first one, foundational, is the data store. The data store provides you access to data storage. Every user has a 100 gigabyte allocation, though if you need more than that, you have the ability to have terabyte allocations. We simply ask that you give us a little bit of justification. Additionally, the data store is designed in such a way that it's really perfect for the type of data management that any type of modern biological investigator working with big data sets needs to handle. The data are backed up in multiple locations. We've made it fairly easy to share your data. And also, we have a really wonderful support for metadata. So all of those things are included in what you get with your CyVerse account in the data store. Moving on from the data store, there are a couple of other things that you need to do once you have that data uploaded. The discovery environment is a web interface to hundreds of bioinformatics applications. And these are platforms. You can run almost any bioinformatics application that you'd normally run in the command line. You can run it in a web interface. It's seamlessly integrated with our data and high-performance computing, and it's user extensible, which means that you can add your own applications. Atmosphere is our cloud computing. You have access to hundreds of virtual machine images where it's flexible and fully customizable for your software setup. It's also integrated with our high performance and other computing resources. We'll do a demo of that later. The Science APIs, if you're a developer, are Science as a Service platform. And there you can define your own compute and storage resources. And again, you can sort of build your own app store, to use that metaphor, of science codes and workflows. Finally, we also have DNA Subway, which we're not going to cover in this demo, but if you're interested in bringing bioinformatics into the classroom, it's a wonderful educational tool for DNA barcoding, RNA-seq, and genome annotation, and it supports inquiry-based experiments. And there's also BISC, which is our image analysis, metadata, and management platform. You can work with hundreds of image types, store those images, analyze, and share those images. Okay. So that was a very brief, I hope, 10-minute overview of the project as a whole. We hope that all of our users have at least a little bit of an idea of where the project is coming from. Now we're going to move into several demos that we have planned over the next remaining time. And we're first going to start with getting your data into CyVerse. At this point, if you look at the links which are on the site there in Adobe Connect, you might want to go ahead and click on the one that says Data Store Guide. That'll open, I think, in a separate window, so you might want to come back with the video. Just be aware that those are where those training resources are that I'm going to be pointing towards now. First, a couple of slides to orient us, and then we'll actually do the demo. Okay, so as I mentioned a moment ago, the CyVerse Data Store allows you to store any type of file related to your research. There are different CyVerse platforms, but once your data are in the data store, it's fairly easy to move the data between those platforms. You can also automate your file transfers, and you can share your files with lab members, collaborators, and communities. There are different ways to access the CyVerse data store. The point-and-click methods include CyberDuck, which is what I'm going to focus on, which is probably the best tool for people uploading their data for the first time. But there's also resources within the Discovery environment and also Command Line, which I'll demonstrate. In the Discovery environment, it's great for small files. There are ways to import from a URL, but there are some size and speed limitations because it's over the web in sort of a normal HTTP protocol. CyberDuck is really the biggest or sort of the best way for uploading big files. If you're new, you want a drag and drop interface. There's no size limit. You can do some editing and previews of those files, and it has really just desktop functionality. And iCommands, if you are comfortable working at the command line, gives you really full flexibility, including the ability to script against the data store and to move things across different servers. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you this. I'm going to first go to the CyVerse homepage. We're going to refer to this many times throughout the webinar, but if you've gone ahead and you've clicked on the data store guide, it'll bring you to the CyVerse Learning Center. So this is not linked from the home page yet. It's still in beta, so we're testing it out. But I'm just going to bring your attention to the data store guide. I'm not going to refer to this on the screen, other than just to point out a couple of things that you may want to do. So everything, all the documentation is here, including downloads that you'll need. So we're going to start with this thing called CyberDuck. So if you don't have CyberDuck, not that you need to do it now, you'll want to go to the CyberDuck website and download CyberDuck. CyberDuck is not a tool that we produce. It's a freely available software which you can download on your own. The other thing you'll download is the CyberDuck connection profile, which is linked from the Learning Center. So when you're ready to do this on your own, perhaps, go ahead to this section on drag and drop data transfer with CyberDuck. It'll take you through setting this up, and literally within 5 minutes or less from download to setup, you should be able to configure yourself to connect to the CyVerse data store. Once you're connected, it looks something like this. So I'm going to go ahead and open up CyberDuck on my computer. This is also the point in the video where you may want to choose to make the video full screen, because I can only make it so large on my computer. And those are the top arrows on the above the video on your Adobe Connect interface. So when you're connected, it looks like this. Actually, when you start CyberDuck, let me start a new CyberDuck window. It'll open up, and I could do it this way. Oops. New browser. It'll open up like this, where once you've downloaded that configuration profile, you'll be prompted to just enter some information for the very first use, and then that's sort of your bookmark to the CyVerse data store. Once you're connected to the data store, it'll look like this, where all the files and folders that you have within CyVerse are located there. And then moving files and folders is just a matter of dragging and dropping. So if I want to take this file from the CyVerse data store and move it to my desktop, I drag it over and we'll go ahead and start the download. If I had a file on my desktop, and I'll go ahead and make a file, or I'll make a directory. Okay, here is an empty directory. It could be a folder of whatever type of files. All I have to do is drag that over into the CyVerse data store, and also in this transfer window, the upload dialog would proceed. With the CyVerse data store and with CyberDuck, you have control over your transfers. You can view the progress, you can pause or reload or resume. So it's a pretty convenient way, and it really is as simple as dragging and dropping. There really is not very much more to it to show you other than to do the download and try it yourself. And I'll also remind you that if you do have questions at any time, just go ahead at the bottom of your screen and type those questions to me. So that's quite a simple way to drag and drop and move data. Let me show you one more way, which is associated with the command line, and then I'll move to the discovery environment, which is again going to be a point-and-click interface. So back on the CyVerse Learning Center, there's a section there called Command Line Transfers with iCommands. You'll have to go ahead and download iCommands, which is available for Mac and also Linux. So we have the instructions there where you want to download. This particular guide is just aimed at showing you how this works at Mac. So you'd have to do this setup, which just takes, I would say, about 5 minutes to go ahead and set it up. Now, I already have this installed on my computer. So what I would do is open up the terminal on my computer. And again, if you're familiar with the command line, great. If you're not, just wait a moment. I'll move on to something else. But for those who'd like to see that, here is a terminal that's on my computer. And then the iCommands follow along in the Linux paradigm. Instead of ls to list the contents of your directory, it's an ILS. And that lists the contents of your CyVerse data store that we saw in CyVerse the CyberDuck a moment ago. The various iCommands are just a simple version of some of them are listed here, but all the sorts of things you'd expect. So for example, if I want to move a file from my CyVerse data store onto my desktop, I can grab with an iget command. I'm going to bring over a directory, so it's going to be recursive, see the progress, be verbose, and I can bring over the VCFs folder, and I'll bring that onto my local computer at the desktop and hit enter, and you can see it's already appeared on the desktop. I get the progress of the download, and when it's complete I'll get a notification that it's done, and then that folder is now on my desktop along with the contents inside. So it's really fairly simple if you're familiar with the command line, and even if you're not and you want to try it, the documentation there is sufficient to get started. Okay, but that's some data upload and download. Let's talk about sharing data, and to do that we're going to use the CyVerse discovery environment. So if you go to the CyVerse homepage, this is at CyVerse.org, and there's also a link within Adobe Connect to get to the homepage. You can click on Discovery Environment, and from the Discovery Environment you can scroll down to Launch the DE, and that will go ahead and launch the CyVerse Discovery Environment. You'll have to go ahead and log in with your CyVerse credentials. I'm already sort of logged in, so I didn't have to enter again. And this is the CyVerse Discovery Environment. Now I'm going to talk about the Discovery Environment in a moment in a little bit of a fuller sense, but for right now we're just going to focus on data. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the data panel, and there again the sort of metaphor here is a desktop with various windows. So if I click on my home folder, which is my CyVerse username, again now for the third time I see the contents of my CyVerse data store, and there are various things that I could do. This is covered if you go back to the CyVerse Learning Center in the guide. There is some information in the next guide that's linked there back from Adobe Connect, which is the Discovery Environment Guide. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the Discovery Environment Guide. It's linked in Adobe Connect, and there is a section on viewing and managing data that covers everything that I'm going to show you in just a moment. Okay. So from the Discovery Environment, there is the ability to upload in terms of importing from a URL. So if you had data that's available at a URL, you could do that here. I'll warn you that that is fairly slow. So if that's your only choice, then by all means go ahead and use it. But for very large files, it may take a bit. But we generally recommend CyberDuck for most of your transfers. Now, let me show you a couple of ways to share data. That's what I'm going to focus on. So if I want to share an individual file, there's a really quick way to do it using a public link. If you're familiar with something like Dropbox, where you can create a link, I'm going to go ahead and click on a particular file, and then I'm going to go up to the Share menu, and then view or click on Create a Public Link. Then I open up one more menu where I see the list of files that I want to create links to. I'm going to go ahead and select that one and click Create. That generates a URL that I could give to somebody for them to download. If I say show that link and Command Copy to copy it, I could go ahead and give that in an email. Anyone in a web browser could click Enter, and then they would be prompted to go ahead and download that file. I'm not going to do that. Once you give that link out, this is a public link, so we don't recommend you sharing very sensitive data sets or very large data sets. Sensitivity, because if the data set is sensitive and anyone who has that link, they could share it with anyone, so you sort of lose control over it there. In terms of size, this is also done over the traditional HTTP protocol, so a 2 or 3 gigabyte file would not be pleasant. If something happened to the download, it got interrupted, they would have to restart from the beginning. So we recommend this for smaller files. Once you are done with the link, or you want to disable the link, then you come back to that same menu and you click the little delete icon, and that link is now deleted. Anyone who pasted that link into the web browser at this point would get a message that it's unavailable. Okay. This again only works with individual files, so let me just talk about how you'd share larger data sets, including folders. So to do that, the other person that you're sharing with needs to have a CyVerse account. As you saw, it's free, so it's not too much trouble if you want to share a large data set. So I'll go ahead and click on a data set that I'm thinking about sharing, and I'll click on Share, and this time I'll say Share with Collaborators. Now what I need to do is find out the username, or just know the name of the person that I'd like to share with, so I can search for them. And I'll search for them by their name, and it'll pull up their name as well as their institution. And at that point, I can decide how I'd like to share with them. Now, there's different levels of sharing within CyVerse. I refer you to the guide, which goes on to tell you the levels of permission. So if I'm sharing and it's a read permission, then they can read that file, they can download, and they can view the metadata. The own is the highest level of permission, and you have to be careful because they can even delete or move those data. So don't give own permission unless someone really warrants it. Now, to actually share this, I would click Done, and I get a notification that that item was shared with a person. I'm not going to do that at this point. If I do have something that is shared, I can open up the same menu and click the X next to their name, and that would revoke permission. I would click Done, and at that point I get another notification that the permission has been changed, and they would no longer have that access to the file. Now, if I go to Shared with Me, these are data sets that are shared with me by other users. Everyone has at least some folders here because they're data sets that are shared with everyone this way. But users who share data with me, that's where it ends up. I would also get a notification here that something is shared with me. Clicking on that notification would actually navigate to the exact location of those data sets where someone has shared something with me. Someone did something recently and shared with me, so it's right there. Okay. There are a number of other features that I'd love to show you, but time won't allow me to go through all of them. I just want to point out to you that we do have fantastic support for metadata within CyVerse. Metadata is described in this managing data set to some extent, and also in the data guide, so you may want to take a look at those. The idea of having metadata on a project is if I have metadata attached, and if I click on metadata and click on download template, you'll see that there are various templates that are important. For example, if I'm submitting my data sets to the NCBI Short Read Archive, many publications and certainly funding agencies are required that your data sets become publicly available, and you'll need these metadata. Once something is associated with metadata, you can not only search for it, as you can search for any file up in the search box here, but you can click on the funnel and get a smart search. So if I want to look for metadata with an attribute like genus, and I want to have the value Dioscorea, and go ahead and click on search, now I can have this sort of fine-grained search of anything in my data store that matches genus and Dioscorea. That's something I really couldn't start putting all of that in my file name, but in metadata, when I go ahead in this very simple example and go and click on view the metadata, I could see that in this particular case, there's a really small, simple piece of metadata that I added myself. Obviously, you can be more sophisticated when it comes to the types of metadata that you'd apply to your own files and your own research. This is taking a second to load since I'm on there we go, on wireless. All right. But now let's talk a little bit about the discovery environment as a place to analyze data. I have a couple of slides, and I'm going to orient us with those, and then we'll come back to the discovery environment, so I'll remain logged in there. Okay, so the discovery environment, it's a platform, so almost any bioinformatics application that normally would run at the command line, you can run that in the discovery environment. It's seamlessly integrated with our high-performance computing, and as you saw with our data, and it's user extensible, which means that you can add your own applications. The data window is something that we just covered. That allows you to upload and import data. It allows you to share data, work with metadata. So that we've covered. The apps menu we'll cover now, where we look at the applications that are installed. We will not cover building automated workflows or integrating new applications, but those are all possible there. And then analyses is where you can monitor the status of a job, find results, cancel, launch jobs, and get a history of your jobs. So let's do a really quick demo. The demo is covered in the Discovery Environment Guide, and this is under the section called Launching an Analysis Job. So there's a sample there. What we're going to work with, if I click on the data sets, what we're going to work with is a sample FASTA file, and that is a preview of it in the CyVerse Data Commons. And we're going to use this unaligned DNA sequence. We're going to just use an application to align this and create a multiple alignment. Okay, so I'm not opening the guide further, but it is there for you to follow along at your own pace whenever you're ready. So to launch a job or to use an application, I'll go ahead and click on Apps. And get a list of apps, applications that are available in the discovery environment. If I click on topic or operation, there's some sorting. So if I click on alignment, I could see applications that are related to that. I'm going to go ahead and search apps for muscle. And in this case, I'm going to use this muscle version 3.8.31. As you see within the discovery environment, applications do have some ratings oftentimes. Good ratings are good. There's no rating, or maybe not a lot of people have used it yet. You can also favorite an app. You can leave comments about the app. And if you click on the info button, you can get some useful information about the app, the version, etc. We don't write these applications. These are the common applications that any bioinformatician might use. So in order to actually use the app, I click on the name of the app and it'll open a window. I'm going to close the app menu and focus on the application itself. So all of the applications within the discovery environment look something like this. I can leave some comments. This is for the July demo. And you do have the option of deciding where those applications, where the results will go. Most times you don't have to touch this, but if you had a shared folder in your lab, for example, you might want to change the default, which you can up in your preferences. But for right now, we're going to focus on the two required steps, which is the input data and the sequence type. So select input data. I need to browse for a file. So I'm going to go ahead and browse. The guide tells you where the sample data are. In this case, in this one, I'm in CyVerse Training Platform Guides, and I'm in the discovery environment, muscle 3831, and the muscle input. Okay, so here is my input file. And then under sequence type, as we saw a moment ago, it is DNA. So I'll click on DNA and click Launch Analysis. When I launch an analysis in the discovery environment, I'll get a notification that analysis is launched. Once it's launched, I can walk away. I can close my computer, close my browser. That will continue into completion. If I want to see the status of that, I can click on the analysis menu, and then I can see the status of jobs. So I could see that it's running right now. If I click refresh, I can get updates on that, but it will take a few moments to run. Now, if I select that application and click on analyses, there are a variety of other things I can do, including this really important one, view parameters. So view parameters gives me a listing of all of the parameters that I use in this particular application. There's a link directly to the file input or inputs. So this is essentially very important for documenting my work. If I want to, I can click Save As, and then I'd be given the option to save this as a text file, so I have that documentation in a way that anyone could read it. The Muscle app is not all of that sophisticated in terms of the number of inputs, but if I clicked on something that was a little bit more, if I find down here somewhere like a top hat job or something like that, that has many more options. Here is an example of one. I could click on it, analysis and view parameters, and there's many more parameters that I might want to document to keep my research workflow. I'm going to refresh this because I got the notification that the analysis is completed. To actually click on the name of the analysis, it'll take me to the outputs. And here are my multiple alignments, and I'm just going to click on one of them. And there is the aligned sequence. So this is an example very quickly of how an analysis is done within the CyVerse Discovery environment. You go in, you select the applications that you'd like to use, then you browse for the data. So it's sort of like using a desktop computer, except everything is already installed, so you don't have to worry about installing them. And these are command line programs, so if you're not comfortable or used to using them at the command line, it's really easy to use them within the Discovery environment. And through the features like viewing the analysis parameters, it makes it easy to document your work. Okay, so remind folks, again, if you do have a question at the bottom of the screen, feel free at any time to go ahead and chat that question. I have one last demo, which is using cloud computing in Atmosphere, so I'll go ahead and show you that. So let me get some slides just to orient us here. Okay, so we did the muscle demo, now Atmosphere. So cloud computing for biology is something that maybe not a lot of biologists at the bench maybe have used yet in their research, but it's a fantastic tool. With Atmosphere, you have access to hundreds of virtual machine images, and I'll describe what that means in a moment. It allows you to fully customize your software setup, and again, it's integrated with our computing and data resources. Now, there are two pieces of vocabulary that you need to know in order to think about using Atmosphere, so this will help orient you. Let me use the illustration of if you've ever gone to buy a new computer, you need to take the data from your old computer and move it onto your new computer. So here's the original system, and you might take your documents and you might put them onto a backup hard drive. But there's another type of file that you could make from your computer, and that's something called an image file. With an image file, it's not merely individual documents, but it's everything on the computer, whether it's your operating system, the software that you've installed, and your data. It's a complete backup of your computer. So on the new system, if you take documents off of a backup hard drive, they're those individual documents. But if you take an image from a backup hard drive, you can completely clone the original system. There would be no need to reinstall software. Your desktop background would be the same. Everything would be just as you left it. That's what an image is. The second piece of vocabulary is something called instance. So within the CyVerse cloud, there are physical resources like hard drives and CPUs and RAM. Memory. So when you are coming to CyVerse to use the CyVerse Atmosphere cloud, you're asking for a certain amount of those. So you tell us how much you need, and in order to build a computer, you actually do need an operating system, so that's where the image comes in. And when you put those two things together, what you end up with is a Atmosphere instance, also known as a virtual machine. So this is a remote computer that you can use on demand, and you'll access it at an IP address that we provide for you. With the Atmosphere, you have the ability to choose an existing image, or you can customize your own. We deliver 16-core, 128 gigabyte machines. That's the max. So you can configure, of course. And you can access it through the shell, and in some cases where the image has a desktop, you can use a desktop browser like VNC. You also have the ability to share your image with selected users, or you can make them public. I'm going to show you a couple of use cases. So if you have software or data sets that you're analyzing, and right now they sort of monopolize your laptop or your desktop, the Atmosphere is a way to get around that. If you have programs that you use for your analysis, but those already have their own graphical interface, you couldn't use those in the Discovery environment, but you could install them on Atmosphere. With Atmosphere, you have full sudo access, which is administrative access, so you don't have to ask others for permission to install things. It's also a really great way to have a uniform computing setup for your lab so that everybody's working with the same tools, the same versions. And it's a great way, if you do develop software, to make those software available to the larger user community. So in this demo, we're going to talk about launching and connecting to an instance. There are a couple of methods, but we do have some new ones that I'm going to show you. You can always use a VNC client if you're using a VNC-enabled image, and you can download VNC Viewer for free. You can also access via SSH at the terminal. If you're using Windows, you might need a free tool like PuTTY, which is a terminal emulator. Mac and Linux already have terminal installed. So let me show you how this works, and point you again in Adobe Connect to the Atmosphere guide, which goes through all of this. So I'll just open this up here, and let me close some of the additional ones that I don't need. So this is the Atmosphere guide, and you may want to refer to the Atmosphere guide. It covers the basics that I'm about to show you. Okay, so to access Atmosphere, you could again go to the CyVerse homepage. And from the CyVerse homepage, there'll be a link to Atmosphere. And from there, you have a Launch Atmosphere link. When you launch Atmosphere and you are logged in, it looks something like this. But I do want to remind you, and this is in the Atmosphere guide, that you need to request access to Atmosphere. So Atmosphere does not come with your CyVerse account. It still is free, but you do have to be a justifiable user. So follow the instructions there to request access if you have not already done so. Okay, so say I've come to Atmosphere on the dashboard. I'll see the number of virtual machines that I have running, my history of what I've launched. And to launch a new one, I'll go ahead and click on Launch New Instance. Now I can search for terms to see if there are instances where software that I might be interested has already been installed. So for example, this takes a second, but I'm searching for RNA-seq, and then what I expect to come back with are images, so software that's pre-configured and pre-installed, where they have tagged RNA-seq as being something that's installed. So in this case, if I look, there are various things that are tagged with RNA-seq, visualization, biosys, etc. I'm going to go ahead and click on this particular one, and to launch it, I'll go ahead and click Launch, and then I'll have an option of configuring the instance, naming it, etc. But once I'm ready, I click Launch Instance, and then that will go ahead and launch. I'm not going to do that right now. Now I already have in my projects a demo instance launched, so I have one here. Oh, I have one that I tried to launch before and it didn't. So I'm going to go click on that one and click Redeploy and get that one to go ahead and fix. But I'll come back to the demo. I've got others that are working. So when I have an instance that's ready, I have a green active and I have an IP address that I can connect to this instance at. If I'll show you first doing it from the tools that we have here. So if I click on this particular one and I want to use the instance, there is a web shell beta, which has worked well for me. So I'm going to click on this, and then it's going to open up in a new window, and I enter my CyVerse password. Let me make this a little bit, well, actually I didn't mean to do that. Type my password first. It was interpreting that as my password. And now I am viewing my CyVerse desktop at the command line. It's a little bit dark here, but I am actually on the desktop of my CyVerse remote machine. I could connect that same way using SSH at the terminal. If I copy my IP address and open a terminal, let me do this one, which is a little bit easier to see. I want a new window with basic. There we go. I can use the SSH program, my CyVerse username at that IP address, enter my password, and then I am connected to that machine. Okay. The other way to do that, and this works pretty well, is back on that instance. There's also a web desktop, so I could click on Open a Web Desktop, and it has worked well for me in the past. So I'll go ahead. Let me try reconnect. Oh, this time it didn't work well. So I'll show you how to do it in a different way. This is Web Desktop. Okay, this one, the non-beta one, seems to work, and I am connected to a desktop. So this is a desktop like a normal computer would be, where I have a home directory. I could view what's in it. In fact, since I'm connected 2 ways right now, I've got this web desktop and I've got my terminal here. I could just demonstrate if I want to create a folder on that desktop from the same machine, and that would be created there. Whoops, I already have one. So let me do Hello World 2, and there, that's created there. So you have a variety of ways to connect. You could also use VNC Viewer. But what this means, essentially, using the Atmosphere cloud computer, is that when you need a new computer, rather than buying a computer that is going to be of limited use for a limited amount of time, let's say you have analysis, it requires a fair amount of power, and you want to have that around, most of the times you use those sort of medium to larger size machines intensively for a short period of time. And rather than buying a machine and then it deprecates on the sort of 9 months out of the year that it's not being used, an Atmosphere instance is the perfect solution. The other reason for using Atmosphere in this sense is that the image is already pre-configured with software and tools, so there's no need for you to have to worry about installing them yourselves. So it really makes it quite convenient to have that on-demand computing. Now, coming back to Atmosphere, a couple other features that you should know about, and these are in the guide. So as you're using Atmosphere, you will be using up your allocation, so that will spin down. So we ask that if you're not using a machine, if you're going to come back to it, you can decide to stop that machine. But if you're really done with it, you can click the delete button. Now, you have to be very careful, because once you delete an Atmosphere instance, there's no way that we can recover those data for you. So you have to be sure that anything that you want to save has been transferred. And there's protocols in the guide for transferring those data from the Atmosphere back to your CyVerse data store. Okay, so I encourage you to look through those guides that are listed there. So final slide or two is really just a question about what's next, and I again encourage you to go ahead and let me know if you have any questions. So we showed that demo. The other things that you should be aware of is on the CyVerse homepage, there is the Learning Center. That's the older version, but it still has this documentation along with tutorials and videos. And you can also see upcoming workshops and webinars. There's an RNA-seq webinar that's happening very soon. And finally, I'll end by acknowledging the executive team across the various sites. So CyVerse is really a sophisticated assemblage of tools into the cyber infrastructure. As we said, we have more than 40,000 registered users, so we're tremendously proud of being able to help them advance their science, and we look forward to doing the same for you.